right, so shifting privacy in. But, wait, is this working? Yes. Before I dive in there, I like to start with some world history. Go way back in time, because the world didn't always look like this. It actually started as one supercontinent, Pangaea. And then, due to some frictions, the continents drifted apart. And for a long time, people kind of focused on local development. Fortunately, now we know we're all living on one big planet, and the only way to make it work is to focus on that global society as a whole, learn from each other, collaborate. And that's actually basically the same for privacy and security. As my dear friend Brooke Schoenfield said, privacy actually used to be part of security, because security people care about data. But what happened was that while working on that, people noticed that privacy is a bit of a different thing, requires a bit of a different mindset, a bit of a different approach, so it kind of drifted away. It got absorbed by legal, GRC, those kind of things. And both domains evolved separately. But it's really time to bring them back together now, tie them back together, because they have that same foundation, and it's really not about that checklist compliance. Privacy is really about implementing a privacy-preserving system, doing that from an engineering approach and doing that together with security. So, what will I be talking about? What do I want you to take away from this talk? Well, first of all, privacy is important. It's not just important in isolation, but it also strengthens security. Privacy and security, privacy by design and secure by design actually have the same foundation, but they require different mindsets. And when tackled together, privacy and security are actually stronger, and a combined analysis will be more efficient. So, as introduced, I am Kim Waats. I am a cyber and privacy manager at PwC Belgium, where we have a really awesome team of cyber privacy and resilience experts. I'm a privacy engineer, and I basically focus on that intersection between privacy and application security. Okay, let's dig in. Privacy is important. That's why we are not living in glass houses. We have brick walls, we have blinds on our windows, we lock our doors because we want to keep certain things private. Now, more and more parts of our lives are becoming digitized. We have all these really cool IoT devices, appliances, cars that are smart, that are collecting information about ourselves. There was this recent study by the Privacy Not Included project at Mozilla that showed what a modern car can collect about you. So, kind of the expected things when you register your name, your address, your phone number, credit card information, a lot of things about how you drive, which is useful because that can be used to personalize your, I don't know, how your car will respond to you. But the list continues. Marital status, race, education, health information, genetic information, facial templates, voice prints, audio recordings, pictures, gaits, sleep data, sexual activity, religion, and so on and so on. Now, I'm just gonna take a second for you to let this sink in. This is the stuff that your car can collect. But I mean, that's fine, right? We trust our car manufacturers. Nothing's gonna happen, right? Well, maybe that's not really safe to assume. Last year there was this thing where Tesla workers were sharing intimate pictures of car cameras. Also, very recently, there was this article in the New York Times by Kashmir Hill saying that some car manufacturers are actually sharing some information to insurance companies, often without people actually realizing. So we really need to be aware that all this information is being collected by all the devices that we're using. And we, as individuals, basically rely on the companies, the organizations, the developers, the architects to handle our information with care. And I'm not just talking about cars and IoT devices, I'm talking about all products, all applications, all systems that are processing personal data. And what does that mean, handle our information with care? How do you do that properly? That means we need to implement privacy by design. And when I talk to people, they typically say, yeah, well, I get it. I mean, yeah, sure, the examples you gave, we need privacy, but we can't. Now, I'm sorry, but you kind of have to. There's a lot of data protection legislations out there popping up across the globe that are saying, well, you need to. But it's not just about compliance. It's the right thing to do, but it will also give you competitive edge because more and more users are looking for that privacy-friendly option. And also, think about what would happen if you don't invest in privacy and something would go wrong. The fallout will be much, much greater. But, well, privacy, sure, but we already do security. Exactly. We already do security, so let's leverage that. Remember I was telling before, privacy and security actually share that same foundation, so we can build upon that. We can actually we will actually align and integrate privacy in the secure development practice. Now, what you need to know is that privacy is not a synonym for confidentiality. For security, we have the triads, confidentiality, integrity, availability. Privacy has its own triad, which is unlinkability, intervenability, and transparency. Or if you prefer the NIST terminology, same things, just different words. Disassociability, manageability, and predictability. I'm gonna give you 2 quick examples to show what that means. So unlinkability means that you can actually, well, you shouldn't be able to tie different pieces of information together, because when you can tie different data items together, that means that more information can be learned, can be deduced. A while ago, there was this small story in some newspapers saying, I think it was in Canada, that there was a vending machine error that looked like this, that freaked out some campus students. Because apparently there was some facial recognition in the vending machines. So the campus reached out to the vending machine company and they said, don't worry, sure, we're looking at faces, but we're not identifying. We're just using all that information to profile you and do some demographics. Well, that's exactly what linking would be about, right? It's still personal information. You're still deducing a lot of additional information from there. So it still needs to be handled with care. And despite their claim that they said, well, we checked and GDPR says we're good, it really is not. Then transparency and intervenability, or control, as I like to call it. I think this is a great example for both. We all know those pop-up banners when we're going to websites. What do we typically do? Well, I typically just click on the big green or red or whatever button and get on with my life, right? And that's exactly why those dark patterns are there. They're designed to make you kind of ignore all the additional information. For all you know, you might be selling your soul. You just want to continue with using the website. So that's a great example of lack of transparency. There is a need for you, for the developers, for the system engineers, for the organization to inform the individuals what's happening with their information. And there should also be a way to control, to intervene as an individual. And that's another example here that's lacking, because basically you can just only say yes, sure, or no, and not use the service. So actual intervenability or control would mean that you have a more fine-grained option. Okay, so that was a very quick intro to what privacy is all about. Let's talk about bringing security and privacy together, because then they're stronger. And to do so, I like to talk about some phases in the development lifecycle, about some structure in the analysis. And I am a really big fan of threat modeling, so I will use this as a structure for my talk. So what is threat modeling? Threat modeling means that you are analyzing a system model to highlight, to find security and privacy issues. And it basically consists of asking 4 questions. We need to understand the system that we're working on. Then we can ask what can go wrong. Then we can try to fix it. And then the final step is a reflection step where we think about, are we doing a good enough job? These are four steps, 4 questions defined by Adam Shostak, and the definition is from the Threat Modeling Manifesto. Before I dive into the 4 steps, I like to mention one more manifesto pattern, which I think applies really well here, and that is that varied viewpoints are really useful, because having a diverse team looking at a system will give you a lot of advantage. And that applies here too for security and privacy, because, well, it's kind of obvious that privacy needs security, right? Because, well, confidentiality is essential. We can do all the anonymization and transparency that we like. If there's no access control, if there's not encrypted communication, all that data is still out there. So security is required for privacy. And if we think about security analysis, secure design, secure implementation, security will focus on the technical details, on the attacks. And it's really asset focused. It's really about, let's protect everything in our system. Now, if we look at the other viewpoint and talk about privacy, the analysis will be a bit different, because from a privacy perspective, we're more looking into the logical business flows. So what data is being collected, how does it flow through the system, how is it going to be used, whom is it going to be shared with? So it's more data-centric, and it's also about the users. And that's great, because having that user focus will also give that additional viewpoint to think about what's valuable for the user. And what's valuable for the user means it's also valuable for the system as a whole. And of course, what is often overlooked is that privacy, minimization, minimality, actually strengthens security, because the less data you're collecting, the less can be leaked, right? So minimality, privacy will reduce the data breach impact. Okay, let's start by talking about what do we need to know when we're analyzing a system from a security and a privacy perspective. We need to understand the assets. We want to know what kinds of data we're looking at, where it's stored. And from a privacy perspective, we need to have a fine-grained understanding. What specific types of data are we talking about? And why are those data being collected, being processed, being stored? What is the purpose? What is already in place as controls? What types of protocols are being used? Is there encryption? Is there authentication? Is there access control? And does that access control include consent flows? And are there PETs, privacy-enhancing technologies such as anonymization techniques? The actors. We are interested in the users and their roles. From a security perspective, we are definitely looking into the attackers. What do we want to prevent from happening? For privacy, it's really about the individuals. And there's a side note here. Individuals are a broader scope than users, because you can have data in your system about people that are not users of your system. So you need to think about those as well. And sure, outsiders are important, but from a privacy perspective, the threats often come from within. It's often like an own goal, where you're abusing information that was entrusted to you. So that's also what you're going to be looking for. So let's talk about that data and the more fine-grainedness we need from a privacy perspective. So just consider this generic system that is collecting some pictures of Alice here, sending it to some backend. That's basically all you need to know from a security perspective. You're gonna encrypt it, have some access control. That's probably enough information to know. But that's just where it's getting started from a privacy perspective. That's the explicit data, but there's also implicit metadata. So those pictures have a lot of additional tags about who is in there, where it is, when it was taken. And that information together can be combined. That's the linking part. Can be, and additional information can be inferred, because if we see from the metadata that Alice and Bob were having some dinner in a restaurant in Brussels on February 14th, well, then maybe we can infer from that that they were on a romantic date on Valentine's Day. And that's just, of course, talking about the inference from this specific instance. There's so much more information in the database internally from external sources that can all be used, combined, linked, and inferred. And then there's one more thing that you might want to take into account. All of this can be triggered by an action that might be overlooked, because it can be that Alice just has set this action to be triggered whenever a picture is taken, send it to the cloud for backup. So just by taking a picture, this whole flow and that inference can be triggered. So all of that needs to be something to take into account. What else? Well, from a privacy perspective, it's really important to know what third-party services you are using. We need that for to record that in our record of processing activities. That's an obligation from the European GDPR, to have good understanding of what you're processing and where that is going. You also need to know that actually before you put it in the record of processing activities, you need to typically do a privacy impact assessment, data protection impact assessment, to know whether you're actually allowed to do this processing. And to be able to assess that, well, you need to know what third-party services you're using. And I talked about transparency. You will need to be able to inform the individuals what is happening with the information that you're collecting about them and who has access to it. So typically we get frowned upon, like, oh, the privacy people are expecting so much information from us. But actually, well, you kind of need that already, right? From a security perspective, you need this too for third-party risk management, right? So it's not overhead, it's just additional information that you need anyways. Okay, so we understand the system. We're gonna talk about what can go wrong. We wanna talk about security threats and privacy threats. Now, maybe you're an expert and you know how to think about this, you got this covered. Awesome. If not, and even if you're an expert, maybe you want some more guidance, some more structure. The nice thing is there's a lot of great reusable knowledge bases out there to think about privacy threats, security threats. Stride is probably the best known example of security threat modeling taxonomy. We have Linden for privacy. I will talk about that in the next couple of slides. These are all threat modeling libraries, basically, but there's plenty more. So this is just a subset of the list. What is important to mention when you're talking about using reusable knowledge bases, they're great, but don't use them as a checklist. Use them as inspiration. Let that trigger your creativity. Think about how this applies to the system specifically. So don't be bound by that information. Okay, so I'm gonna talk a minute or two about Linden. Linden is a privacy threat modeling approach, similar to Stride, so it's it can be nicely integrated together with Stride for the people who are already using Stride or similar security threat modeling approach in their security practices. And Linden is actually an acronym for 7 privacy threat categories that you should be tackling. The first one is linking. I talked about linking before. that means that you can combine different pieces of information. A next step would be that you can identify pieces of information. That means that you can tie that to an individual. Then there's non-repudiation, which for security people might sound weird as a threat category, because from a security perspective, non-repudiation is a property that you want to achieve. From a privacy perspective, that's a threat, or can be a threat, and sometimes you want to have plausible deniability of an action, of something you do, of something you know. Then there's detecting. It's kind of like side channel attacks. So without actually having access to the data, you can still deduce, you can still observe and deduce additional information. Then there's data disclosure or data abuse, which is about the minimality principle I talked about before. That means that you're processing more than you should. It goes beyond the purpose that was originally intended. Unawareness, that's the transparency and intervenability one, or lack thereof. And then there's the non-compliance category, which is basically the catch-all term to say privacy shouldn't be tackled in isolation. There needs to be some integration with security. There needs to be an integration with lawfulness, with legal experts. Data management is also important. So these are the 7 categories that from a privacy perspective should be tackled. You can find everything on the Linden website. It's all freely available, but there's more than just the categories. There's a whole knowledge base behind that, which is either a set of threat trees or a set of threat cards that will help you to systematically think about what can go wrong. Okay. So, we have these reusable knowledge bases to think about what can go wrong from a privacy perspective. How can we make that practical? How can we apply that? Well, first of all, we need to decide, can it happen? So we need to look at our system, look at information from that knowledge base and think, well, at this particular place in the system, would it be possible? And then there's a second question, which is kind of also something you need to ask from a security perspective, but definitely from a privacy perspective. That is, would it be a problem? Because in many cases, being able to link 2 pieces of information or having identifiable information in your system, well, that's just basically the functionality, right? So if you come from the theoretical angle, then you will say, well, everything is a privacy issue, and that's not really practical. So we need to not just think about, is this possible, but will it be a problem? And not just for you as the organization, but for the individual at stake, whose data is being handled. Okay, so an example of how security and privacy live together for a same activity. If we think about voting, the action of casting a vote has both a security and a privacy angle there. So from a privacy perspective, it should be impossible to know who you voted for. So there's a need for plausible deniability. You will need to be able to deny whom you voted for. From a security perspective, in some countries, there's the obligation to go voting, so you need to be able to prove that you actually casted a vote. So there's also that non-repudiation requirement for that same action, casting a vote. Both can and should work together, but that means that it's important that you tackle them, well, that you find them and tackle those requirements together, because otherwise it will be rather difficult to make sure that for that same action, both requirements can happen. So how do you do this combined analysis of privacy and security? Do you really throw all the security and privacy issues together on one big pile? Or are you going to go for a separate, more scoped analysis where you do security at one point and privacy at another point? Well, to give the consultancy answer, it depends. I think that if you're gonna go for a kind of high-level ad hoc brainstorming exercise, then yes, definitely just throw everything on a big pile and see whatever you can find. That's great. You found a threat. It doesn't matter whether it's security or privacy. Great. If you're gonna go for a more systematic, structured analysis, anyways, then I suggest to split it up and actually tackle security first. I'm a big fan of privacy, so I always thought, well, let's tackle privacy first, so at least it gets enough time and attention. But it's not working, because we're so used to thinking about security that even if we say, let's tackle privacy first, the first threats that come up are actually security threats. So to avoid that mix-up, let's start with security, and then if we tackle that, we can focus on privacy. Okay. We found our threats. What are we gonna do about it? So what we typically see as what privacy is, that's PETs, privacy enhancing technologies. Anonymization techniques are the typical example there, and they're great, but I don't think that's the first step to look at. I think we need to start looking at privacy strategies and privacy tactics, so more high level. Look at, well, do we actually need this information? Can we minimize? Maybe we can separate bits and pieces, put some things in one database for administrative data and some in a more anonymized form at a different place. By the way, you can find the design strategies on the website you see here by Jaap Henk Hoekman, professor in the Netherlands. And in between those strategies and PETs, there's even another abstraction layer, that's patterns. And there are a bunch of specific patterns for privacy too. And now, especially in this step, it's really important to tackle both security and privacy together. It's the goal to have both working together. We're striving for this full functionality, this positive sum approach, as Anke Vulkian says in her Privacy by Design work. So that means that don't wait to add privacy later on, because, well, if the system is already designed and implemented, then the only thing you can do is try to patch some worst case situation. It's really important to integrate it early on. So that means we're not aiming for a separate solution, but we're looking for something that works from both angles, from security and privacy. And that brings us to the final step. That's, did we do a good enough job? That's a reflection step, and that's not just about, did we find all threats? That's also important. But this is really about, is this thing working? We're integrating privacy in our security practice. We finally convinced people to focus on privacy, to work on that. But it shouldn't be a one-time thing, right? We really want to have privacy there all the time. So we want to see if the way we are doing it now, is it valuable? Will people want to do it again? And how can we make it better the next time? Because we really want to make this work. We really want to get people excited about threat modeling, privacy engineering, and bring that together with security. Okay, so if all of this privacy engineering thing is so great, why are we not all doing it yet? Well, there are a number of attention points that we should be aware of. First of all, there's this misconception that privacy is just about lawfulness, or privacy is just about anonymity. And of course that's important too, but privacy goes way beyond that. Privacy is also about minimization, transparency, purpose limitation. And what some privacy professionals are forgetting, it's also about security. It's also about confidentiality. It's also about accountability. It's really the whole range that needs to be covered. Another thing that is holding us back is that, especially when we're talking about solutions, but also about general privacy engineering approaches, the focus is more on the functional. Did we really get that anonymity working? Is the crypto okay? Did we cover all threat categories? And that's important, of course, but the non-functional properties are equally important. That means we're talking about usability. I'm gonna misquote Avi Duglan on this because he has this quote saying, security at the expense of usability is at the expense of security, and I think the same applies for privacy. Privacy at the expense of usability is at the expense of privacy because, well, it's great that you are doing a fantastic job and you have this great solution or this great idea of how to do this perfectly. If nobody's doing it, then it's not working. Make sure people want to use it, make sure people can use it, make sure it fits in the developer approach that you have at your company. Privacy people have a bit the reputation of being intense or being too perfectionist, going for, well, we need this all or nothing thing. We really cannot use any personal data because that's bad. Of course, that's not the case. And it's not realistic, it's not practical, it's not usable. So I hear a lot of people saying, well, we tried this thing, and then we were thinking like, well, is this enough? And we just stopped doing anything at all. Anything that you're doing is great, and you can always extend and improve after that. So rather than going for that all or nothing approach, go for reasonable privacy. Start there, and you can evolve after that. So privacy engineering is a technical thing, actually, but for many people, it's a legal activity. So that means that there is currently quite a big technical privacy skills gap. So that needs to be tackled so you don't lag behind. And if you invest in this, then you might even become part of impacting that state of the art. Okay, so to conclude, privacy and security can be and should be done together because then they're stronger. So to come back to the initial takeaways, privacy is important, not just in isolation, but it can strengthen security. Security and privacy by design share the same foundation. They have different mindsets, they require different mindsets, but they basically are the same type of engineering approach. And they are better together because a combined analysis is more efficient. If we see the 4 steps that I was talking about for threat modeling, you need to have an understanding of your system anyway. You need to think about what can go wrong if you do that for security or privacy. You need to tackle the threats you found. So there's not that much. If you do both in isolation, you have to do the process twice. If you combine it, well, it becomes much more efficient. And you can already focus on that interplay between both. And as an additional takeaway, threat modeling is really awesome. So not just for privacy, also for security, and even better together. Because it's a great vehicle that enables that by design approach. It gives you that guidance, it gives you that structure, and the output of a threat model can also guide the subsequent development steps, give input on what you will need to use as pen testing tests. There's going to be another talk about privacy and security threat modeling this afternoon by Chris Romeo, so also highly recommended to check that one out. Okay, so as a final call to action, what I hope you will remember and I hope you will put to practice is that, well, next week just start small. Just keep this talk into account, and whenever you're considering using personal data, make that reflection, do we really need it? If you don't, well, then don't collect it, don't process it, don't store it. Next, it's important to think about that skills gap and tackle that. Privacy is not just legal compliance. There's technical skills needed, engineering skills needed. Privacy is also not just security. There's a different mindset needed there. So look at what do we have in our company? Do we have privacy champions that can tackle this? Do we need further training? Do we need to hire some privacy engineers? Tackle the technical skills gap, and then you can start working on really embracing privacy engineering, really looking at what is going on in our security practice and how can we bring everything we know from a privacy perspective in there. So not just tackle privacy in isolation, but look at how we can make it work for what you already have, what is already proven to be working for security. All right, and then we can really shift privacy in and make security and privacy strengthen each other. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer. Thank you.
Wow, I never thought I'd have a microphone that was too short for me. So my first thought is an observation, particularly on where you asserted in the very end there that a security mindset is different from a privacy mindset. I'm going to respectfully disagree.
Okay.
And the reason I'm going to disagree is I'm going to sum it up in 4 words, or 6. Security is least privilege. Privacy is least data. So it's the same mindset pointed at 2 different things, right? Stopping people or systems from doing things they shouldn't, and stopping people or systems from having things they shouldn't.
Okay, yeah.
So that kind of leads into a thought and a question. Maybe 10 or 15 years ago, there was an effort to create like a method combined with a repository, and this repository would have validated information in it, like my age, my height, my weight, eye color, all of these things, and that when I go to like my cable company, I would give them my name and address and my phone number, because those are the things they need to do their business. But then I want to select an adult channel. They would query the repository and say, is this person over the age of 18? Right? So you'd be able to ask boundary questions that you could get an authoritative answer to, as opposed to collecting the data and keeping it. And that seems to have died off. Do you know if maybe there's an effort to bring this kind of an approach back?
Yeah, like I know there has been a lot of work on anonymous credentials indeed, and I don't know why, because I think it has a lot of value, but maybe they went overboard and didn't focus on that usability part too much, because then everything, all the responsibility came into the user hands mostly to say, well, it's okay for me to share these attributes with that service, and then with that party I will share these 3 attributes. And well, putting that, it's great that you can give that to the users, but 99% of the users do not want to or do not know how to do that. So I think that might be where it went wrong a bit, but I think the technology is great, and I would hope that we see more of that, because, well, now our single sign-on thing is basically just using Google or Meta. So, yeah, that's going the different direction than anonymous credentials. Yeah.
Right. I think users who go, oh, it's like, okay, you can either get what you want, or you can complain about getting what you want. You can't do both.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. So I know you said that. I know you said that in seeking privacy we should go beyond what's required by law, but just because you're from Europe, I'd like you to touch on what's the privacy landscape both in Europe and places that aren't Europe or California. Like, how is it that much more is it really that much of a threat in places like Europe and California where they do have?
Is it really that, you mean compliance?
Not so much compliance, but
The fines.
Privacy, like, how much of a challenge is privacy there versus other places where we don't have any meaningful legislation?
Well, technically, it's the same challenge, right? But getting the funding to invest in it will be the tricky part, I guess, because at least for Europe, we have that, like, look, you need to do it anyway. In places where you don't have that, it's harder to sell. Also, I talked to a lot of American friends who said, like, well, I don't really care, and we don't really have the law, so, well, it's going to be really hard to invest in that. But if you have an international company, international application website, well, you still need to do so, because if you have European customers, you still need to prove that you have done your due diligence and take care of all of those. So the GDPR kind of becomes the norm when you're talking about international privacy baseline, I guess, because, well, it's possible that some of your customers, some of your users will be European, and that means you need to comply anyways. But yeah, it's a complex ecosystem, I agree, yeah. That's why I rather approach it from the technical perspective than from the compliance perspective, because the technical perspective will remain the same.
Thank you. Great
Thanks.
presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, also echo the point, a really interesting presentation. On that first question, I do know that there's work in the ITF at the moment on that credential sharing. So there's sort of protocol design work underway at the moment, so that's being revisited. On my a couple of comments though. On the sort of data minimization, perhaps a point I'd add to what you said is if you haven't got as much data, then your system's less attractive to attackers. So that's also, I think, a consideration. The less you've got, the less worthwhile it is going after your system. So that's a positive. On the negative side, though, to maybe tackle the premise, I do see some changes, for example, in internet protocols because privacy, which absolutely undermines security, where key indicators of compromise are being encrypted so they're not visible, for example, to enterprise firewalls, and that absolutely weakens security. So I think if you're looking at this from a whole systems point of view, you need to be careful not to do things because of privacy without thinking whether they have negative security impacts.
Yeah, well, of course, I like to shine the light on the positive things of privacy, but of course there's always going to be that trade-off, but that's exactly why I think it's important to tackle them together and not have the privacy people coming up with rules and crazy implementations saying like, well, this is the stuff you need to do. Well, you need to focus on that integration and on bringing both together and come to a combined thing that works for both.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's not going to be just so straightforward, but that's good. That means that we still have some work left to do. Thanks.
Thanks for a great presentation, Kim. So I'm just curious for your thoughts, just given your expertise and, of course, being in Europe. So in the United States, with the laws in California, we've been seeing, of course, this emergence of the chief trust officer, particularly in tech companies. But when we talk about some of the other highly regulated industries, and the fact that privacy still really isn't, always a key focus from senior management, when I talk to CISOs, many of them are interested in focusing on privacy. Many of them are interested in hiring privacy engineers. But I think an eventual question is, okay, well, where do privacy engineers actually sit? And who owns privacy? Because there needs to be a strategy around privacy as well, and it could be an offset of security. But then in some ways depending on the environment of the organization, then that can be actually then giving a lot of additional responsibilities to the CISO where they just may not need that at that time when they have a lot of other things that they're focusing on. So I'm curious to know what your thoughts are around reporting structures in a lot of the companies in the United States, given this kind of gray area. And also, you know, what do you think? Because I've gotten in conversations with COOs that are like, well, privacy is going to sit under me. So that means privacy is going to sit under the CIO. And that is like a huge conflict of interest, I think, in many ways. So I'm curious to know your thoughts on this.
Yeah, so the consultancy answer is it depends. And I think it's really true. It depends on the structure of the organization, where it fits. I think currently it mainly goes under the legal GRC umbrella, which makes sense because it was kind of absorbed there. But I don't think it's the best place there because then it lacks that technical integration. So I would like to see it move more to the technical side, whether that's security, a separate vertical, or I think that depends on the size of the company and the hierarchy that is there. But I like to see it more in the technical part because the essence will be not to have our compliance checklist done, but the essence will be to have a privacy respecting system built. So if that's the goal that you're focusing on, it shouldn't go into the compliance side, but it should go into the technical side. Thanks.
Thank you for your presentation. It was very informative and completely accurate and what have you, but it seems to focus more on corporate data governance and privacy initiatives and what have you, and there's a subject that is not being talked about at all in the media, but it's a crisis in the security industry. I work with a lot of appliance manufacturers for secure web gateways, for routers, for wireless routers that are trying to protect people, endpoint solutions and network solutions, trying to protect people, and the privacy initiatives that have been coming along lately are completely neutering our security industry. They're turning off all visibility of the ways to protect a person, and they were basically just handing the bad actors free rein to infect everybody. Because if you encrypt your communications to a website, if you encrypt your DNS, if you encrypt your SSL hello, there's absolutely nothing stopping you from going to the place that is going to infect your computer. There's nothing that a security product can do to stop that at all. We need to find a balance and education so that people know they need security in their router and they can give up some privacy between them and their own personal router or their own personal gateway and let the security begin after that. But if they turn off their endpoint solution and they turn off their router security, they're free rein for infection.
I agree. I mean, from my privacy evangelist perspective, I would say, like, well, as much privacy as we can, but I think it's killing the privacy reputation so much that we really need to focus on that we need to find a balance that works. It should be reasonable, and I'm not sure where that is and whether it's possible to find something that will resolve both, that will have and that awesome security and have privacy protection. There might be some ways to have like reversible encryption kind of things if you need to check certain.
Yeah.
It's going to be
the technology
yeah.
is already there. People are turning it off,
Yeah.
unfortunately. But the technology is, and privacy is right there in your own personal connection to the internet, but people are choosing all the privacy features that disable all of those security features.
Yeah,
And-
I think.
And they don't know it.
No, it's true. We
Because
lack
nobody's
awareness.
nobody's talking about it.
We lack awareness, and if we let users be in charge, which is awesome, then we need to make sure that they are aware of the consequences, both from a security and a privacy perspective. So I think we still have a long way to go to make that happen. But yeah, I
Yep.
agree. We need to find a balance, and we're not there yet.
Yep. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, apparently we're out of time, so thank you all for joining